everyone. I'm Richard Fedrickson, and this is going to be a special, and I do mean special show for you. I met this gentleman, I want to say somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s. I was doing a talk show on WJOL radio, and then through the years, Clancy would call up on a number of different topics and subjects, and we'd chat a bit on the air. And then I kind of lost track of Clency Hess, and he's been into all sorts of things. I wanted you to meet this gentleman. I hope we have enough time to cover all the topics and subjects and stories and memories that Clency Hess, at the young age of 91, has to share with you today. First of all, Clancy, thank you so much for taking time out. And we're here at the Fitzpatrick House. I know there's some history there with you as well and the family. And I know that your family was connected with the Frank Lewises, and that's for another show. We'll do that one later on, and Brother Gaffney, I promise you, we'll do that. Pilot, author, researcher, student, World War II veteran, Korean veteran, photographer, American Airlines pilot. My goodness, what else we have here? Some of the important things. He's a dad, he's a husband, grandfather, great-grandfather, and a member of the EEA. And he would have been a founding member, but he was busy over there in Korea at the time. He is a founding member of the Aopa, which you'll find out what that is in a moment here. Back in 1939, I believe that was founded. And you are a Luxembourger, correct?
Total.
All right. Now,
Stubborn.
Stubborn Luxembourger. So tell me a little bit about your family, and then we'll go right into the stories and the saga of Clency Hess. Tell me about your parents and then your immediate family.
My dad grew up on a farm in Luxembourg, Iowa. My mother grew up in Rogers Park on the north side of Chicago. Luxembourgers. They actually met only 3 times. The third time they met was the day they were married. They were the first couple to go to church on the north side of Chicago in Rogers Park in an automobile. It's could be quite a history to get in by itself.
Yeah, I bet you, was that St. Lambert's Church? There's a
St. Henry's.
St. Henry's, yes. Okay, my wife may be related to you somehow because she's a Luxembourger. They were up in Rogers Park and greenhouses and all that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that after the show. You're married to a lovely lady.
Oh boy, she grew up on me during World War II. She was the younger sister of my best buddy, who was a top sidekick with Arthur Collins, who started Collins Radio Company and is revered worldwide as the grandfather of ham or amateur radio.
Yeah. And your wife's name?
She is a Kathleen Curley.
Known as Kate. Right.
When I was recuperating after World War II, the medics kept sort of quietly suggesting, because of the Marine Corps experience, I maybe couldn't be a daddy. And the mix of a Kathleen Curley and a Clency Hess as a Luxembourger proved them all wrong, so we had 6 kids.
You have 6 children, and what is that, 4 girls and 2 boys?
2 boys and 4 girls.
There you go.
No. 2 girls and 4 boys.
Okay, yeah, I'm misleading him here. And they're all within, all over the country or here in the area?
Bob is in San Jose, California. The rest are close by here.
Good. Well, we'll make sure you get a copy of this if you're watching us right now. Clency Hess, you were in the Herald News. They had you a couple of months ago in the Herald News. And that's really when I said, I've got to get there and talk with Clency.
Veterans Day in November.
Yeah. Yeah, November of 2012.
Yeah.
And we'll show some of those pictures of that handsome guy with the mustache looking like Earl Flynn with the pipe and the cigar in the pipe. There's probably a story with that. Well, we're not going to do that right now, though. We're going to do this. You talked about growing up in that Rogers Park, Skokie, Illinois area. And there's going to be all kinds of what we'll call factoids coming your way, facts. When was the very first time, when was it that you were fascinated with airplanes, and how did you get involved at an early age with flying planes?
I just grew up with them. My father was the carpenter who did the woodwork on what was the first aviation country club, because of Charlie Lindbergh's successful flight to Paris in 1927. Along the lines of the organization of golf clubs, the first aviation country club was Curtis Reynolds, not far from where we lived, up in Glenview, on the northwest side of Chicago. And my folks did a lot of traveling, and we had relatives in California. I got my first airplane ride when I was 4 years old with a fellow named Earl Doherty, who was already historic because he was the pilot for Billy Somerville at Coal City, Illinois. And Billy Somerville was the guy who set up the first airport in the whole world. The first airplane factory was in Coal City, and Earl Doherty was his pilot. And as it progresses, the history of that is pretty unique. And we were in Long Beach, California, and my dad got me an airplane ride with Earl Doherty.
Oh, boy.
And then back here in 1930, the National Air Races were brought to Curtis Reynolds Airport.
Now, where was that airport at?
It became finally Glenview Naval Air Station.
Okay, sure. Okay.
During World War II. And it's been demolished now.
It's a Glen. It's a beautiful high-income suburban housing area out there.
Oh, yes.
Very fancy, Clancy. Very fancy. Very fancy. Very nice. So, okay, so now you're age 9 or 10 or something, and how do you, all of a sudden you're flying airplanes. How does this take place as a young child?
Well,
as 9 years old or 10 years old?
Well, when they brought in the National Air Races, my dad and 2 other guys organized building temporary wood bleachers for people to watch the air races. That was the end of Prohibition and the beginning of the Depression. Air racers, air racing pilots, their way of making a living had been destroyed by the end of Prohibition, because the World War I pilots that were trying to make a living at aviation were booze runners.
No.
And Art Chester, for example, who became the manager of the first Joliet-owned airport, he was one of the top race pilots ever. And truth be known, the magnificent P-51 fighter that was so successful in World War II was the result of the engineering of that fine gentleman. Wow. And all of the race pilots stayed at our house in Skokie because my dad saw bad weather coming in. These race pilots didn't have much money, and they all brought tents and were camping out under their airplanes when they arrived. He saw weather coming in, so he invited them down to our farmhouse to stay the night. Well, first thing they discovered, he was a stubborn Luxembourger and had a basement full of the good home brew. And you can better believe all of them, including Jimmy Doolittle, stayed at our house all during the air races.
So now we have all these guys staying around, and some of these guys are what you call barnstormers also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so now how did you end up? I read somewhere where you're flying an airplane at the age of 9 or 10.
Yes. Well, that came about because of these pilots staying at our house, and I was cooking breakfast for them every morning. In 1930, I was 9 years old. And another race pilot named Johnny Livingston from Waterloo, Iowa, was also regarded as a top air racer, and that was when the first bureaucracy of the federal government finally showed up as the Bureau of Air Commerce. And Joe Reed was the first inspector, and Johnny Livingston on the third night showed up with Joe Reed in tow. Well, he didn't tolerate the home brew so well, so he had quite an evening. Next morning at breakfast, in a loud argument, who needs this bureaucracy? You're going to ruin aviation and all that stuff. And Johnny Livingston loudly proclaiming, I can teach any motivated 10-year-old to fly my Wheeling monocoupe in no time at all. So on my 10th birthday, he sold me.
I have to ask you this question. Okay, so he picks you out. What did your mother have to say about this? What did your father have to say about this? Or did they know?
No, they knew all about it, sure. My God, it would get pretty extensive talking about how I went back and forth to Curtis Reynolds Airport, Palwaukee Airport, Sky Harbor, just all through the 30s.
So
I was the airport kid.
Okay, so you're the airport kid, but before you get to the airport kid, what was it like? I mean, you're up in an airplane, you're 10 years old. Now, I happen to know that it's relatively easy to fly a plane. It's this business of taking off and landing that's somewhat of a challenge. How did you do that? I mean, you're 10 years old. He teach you how to do that too? Obviously.
We had the closest neighbor was the Meyer family, who had a son who was a race car driver. His name was Louis Meyer, who won the Indianapolis race 3 times, starting in 1929. He, because of Charlie Lindbergh again, bought one of the first airplanes built in 1928, a Waco 9 they called it, with a World War I OX-5 type engine in it. And he was taking me for rides with him all the way from, when I was, from starting in 1927. So from just riding around with, I had a growth spurt, went to 5'2" by the time I was 10 years old.
Whoa.
And then it kind of stopped for a while. But I knew darn quick what the heck a stick and rudder did to control an airplane. So when Johnny Livingston showed up on my 10th birthday, and he had gotten pretty friendly, real good friends with my folks, and he'd show up every once and we'd be talking about airplanes. And holy mackerel, he only rode around 3 times with me that day, got out and said, go fly it, kid.
At 10 years old.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna travel on this journey here now, Clancy. You the Depression comes at that time, and you leave Illinois, and you're going back to, your folks are going back to Iowa, where there's a connection. There's family out there.
Family out there, and farm living available, and all that stuff was a heck of a lot better way of life than the Depression type stuff going on in urban areas like Chicago.
Yeah, I'll bet. So you're in a place called Dyersville, Iowa, is that it?
Yeah, first Colesburg for one winter, and then I was in high school in Dyersville, and that got to be pretty crazy because I was no challenge in the school, and every day I'd hitchhike over to Dubuque and overnight at the airport, get up early in the morning, and get back to Dyersville to go to Catholic Mass. It was a totally Catholic region, and the church there is a renowned basilica now. It has 2 steeples. And in 1937, the people at the Dubuque airport had a new airplane, and I had changed the spark plugs in it, so I was out flying a little bit, and I went to Dyersville and was practicing close turns using the church, and I saw the padre come out of the rectory. Next time around, I put a wingtip between the 2 towers. Next time around, he's down there waving his fist at me.
I can't imagine why. You know, there's so much, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm not going to be able to get everything except the mountaintops of your life and times here, Clancy. But an interesting individual was a neighbor of yours in Iowa. I don't know if it was Dyersville or where, but he was a kid and he liked to draw. You remember this guy? Because he's a pretty famous man. Last name Wood?
Yep. He's the guy that came up with that famous painting of the stern-looking farm couple with the pitchfork.
Yeah, Grant Wood.
Grant Wood.
Yeah.
He was our neighbor, and at that time, just out of high school, Art Collins had me taking care of his airplane at that time for 10 cents an hour. And then he let me fly it all I wanted, and I put 400 hours on it in 1939 and 40. And he bought the gas, which then was 10 cents a gallon. And in actuality, a hard-working carpenter or plumber in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, back then raised the family on 25 cents an hour.
Wow.
So I was making out better than they were.
Yeah, and having fun.
Oh, boy.
Having fun.
Now.
It doesn't take long before the clouds of war come into to our country and to the world, actually. And the war breaks out, and you join the Army Air Corps.
First went into the Navy.
Really? And I didn't know that.
And then I transferred out of the Navy into the Marine Corps.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the Navy. You're up at Great Lakes then? Is that
No. Started in the pre-flight school at Iowa City, then to Glenview, and was expedited through there pretty fast because I had more flying experience than a bunch of the instructors. And down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and commissioned, and then proceeded overseas.
As a Marine?
Yes.
As a Marine. And we're going to have to delete that part where I said Army. We'll have to get that. We'll have to delete that.
Connection, because Jimmy Doolittle stayed at our house during the National Air Races. I've known Jimmy all the way back to 1930.
Yeah, we've got a picture of him.
We have pictures of him here.
All right, so tell me a little bit about, there's so much to tell, and I'm just going to ask you a couple of things, and you can kind of take us, because this is World War II, and we're going to, later on we'll talk about Korea as well. So a couple of things come to mind. You're in World War II. What are you doing? Because you're not just a pilot during World War II, correct? Is there some other things?
No, I was, when we were organizing at Santa Barbara Airport, close to Los Angeles, then I had all these cameras with me. And I got authorization to collect camera equipment and supplies. I wound up with 13 trunk lockers that we took along when we went overseas on a carrier for transportation to set up the first. There had been combat photography way before me out there, but there was no organized combat photography. So when I showed up with 13 trunk lockers full of equipment, and then that was the introduction time for the Army with the Americal and 37th Divisions, and we combined forces, and that set up the first organized combat photography. So all the pictures I have are properly organized and identified.
Yeah. How many do you have?
Oh, thousands. Susie, our youngest daughter, finally dove into the chore of modernizing and transferring all this photography on the computer way of life now. So I have an iPod there with 6,000 pictures in it now. Probably have another 6,000 to go, and boxes full of 8mm movies.
Wow. Now, some of the stuff is archived in Texas.
Oh, that has to do with a special program that we're working on for Lewis, but we can't talk about that right now yet.
But there's more photographs.
Oh boy!
Yeah, there are more photographs. Now, let's stay with the photography for a while, because that wasn't all you did in World War II either. But some of the adventures, some of the folks, some of the things you took pictures of. Can you share that with us? Oh
my! Well, the primary one is another person who is really Army Air Corps, and in my thinking is the most successful person to come out of Plainfield, because he grew up on a farm there and managed to get into Notre Dame, and his roommate was a guy named Hesburgh, who became a Catholic priest and boss of Notre Dame for so long. Everybody knows about Father Hesburgh. Yeah. And he wound up in the Army Air Corps, commissioned just before Pearl Harbor.
What was his name, Clancy?
Jacques Hennebrey.
Okay.
John Hennebrey from Plainfield. He was posted in Australia just before Pearl Harbor and became the commanding officer of all bombing operations that started in Australia in World War II, then up through New Guinea and through the Philippines on into Japan. And Jacques, in his early 20s, was the first Army general, the youngest one, I mean.
Yeah. In his 20s?
In his 20s.
I never heard of that. It's really,
and it's all published.
Historic.
It's all documented in the book, his book, and it's titled A Grim Reaper, and I have them all here at Lewis if somebody who ever wants one.
Well, we'll get a little closer picture of that one and show the folks right now if you want to do that.
He pioneered all low-level bombing with the B-25s and the A-20s, and he was typical of people like Art Collins and Jimmy Doolittle and Johnny Atanasoff. Johnny Atanasoff is established as the grandfather of computers.
Yeah.
He was a professor at Old Iowa Agriculture, today the University of Iowa at Ames, Iowa, and established as the grandfather of computers that everybody lives by now. And it's association with top people like this that is why I've been through a lifetime of this stuff.
You sure have. What about that? You were showing me a picture of, I believe, Admiral Halsey.
Oh, yeah.
And who was that with him in that picture?
Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, and the first Army general out there, his name was Griswold, and he got popular with the troops because when battles were finally won and some decent security, because the climate out there was pretty hot, and he got the nickname Shorts because he told everybody, cut your pant legs off, you can wear shorts for the day.
Yeah. That's in the Pacific Theater.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe on the lighter and brighter side, were you also taking pictures of some of the forerunners of the USO entertainers?
Oh, yeah. Well, Jack
was that
Benny.
USO then? Or was
yes.
It was USO.
Jack Benny came through on his first USO tour, and Carol Landis was the Marilyn Monroe of the day.
Yeah.
And that was quite an experience with them. I shot all these pictures of them, and then not long later, Bob Hope showed up with Jerry Colonna and Frances Langford and Patty Thomas, their dancing girl.
Yeah, that picture of Jack Benny, I wonder if the folks can actually pick him out because he looks so young in that picture.
Oh, yeah, he's the one guy in the middle of that picture with the tie on.
With the tie on. But there's a couple of stories I do want you to share with us, one of which has to do with Betty Hutton. Tell me about this thing with Betty Hutton. Well, we got Bob Hope in there, we got Jack Benny, but what about Betty Hutton and Clency Hess?
Well, we were based in Santa Barbara, which wasn't all that far away, and she came up there to visit the Marines, and that's why I met her there. And I knew some other people who were actors and that stuff down in Hollywood, and so we had frequent, just fun get-togethers down there. We were never girlfriends or anything like that, and didn't get. Actually, we had a primary difference. She smoked like a chimney, and I just kidded her all the time about that. I couldn't stand those damn cigarettes.
The tobacco. Wow.
But yeah, we had a lot of fun for a couple of months, being invited in with that Hollywood crowd.
The Hollywood crowd and Clency Hess. Speaking of smoking and not wanting tobacco, I seem to remember you standing outside a tent with a pipe in your mouth, yeah, and there's a story about that as well. You've been dropped off, you're outside your tent, and then what takes place?
Oh, no, that was the picture they shot of me just before I got to leave from the Solomons to come home for Christmas.
Okay, tell me about
44. And that picture came about because of what I told you earlier about the beer run. And that's where I had the makings for just a rum cocktail, and I didn't have pipe tobacco, so I stuck the cigar in my pipe.
In your pipe.
And for this picture, they shot of me before I got to come home Christmas of 44.
But there's another one too, Clency, where you're dropped off at your tent.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got a pipe in your mouth, but and the fact of the matter, you're taking all these pictures.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy said what? He said, wait a minute or something to you before going in your tent?
Oh, that's what I just told you about the tent getting blown up.
Right. But I want you to tell it for the folks. We did it off camera.
Oh, okay.
So what happens? The guy drops you off, and he says, wait a minute, I'm going to take a picture of you.
Correct. Because I'd been doing most of the photography, and he had one frame left in his camera, and he yelled at me. He said, "You're shooting all the pictures. We got to have one of you." And when he shot it, it was like the end of the world. There was an ammunition dump located a short distance behind where my tent was. Blew up at that time. And boy, you can imagine, within an instant we were flat on our face in a ditch, and just barely there, and a shell came in and blew my tent all to heck.
So it's a good thing that man said, Clency, we want to take a picture of you. Wow. Yeah, you wouldn't be here.
The crazy things that happened in wartime.
Yeah, all a minute here, a second there, and things change. So that was the fun part of if you can say, the moments taking time out from some of the really tough times in World War II. When you were not taking photographs, what else was Clency Hess up to?
We were the first squadron that was equipped with rockets, and we developed ways to be able to aim them properly, and they showed up, quite a supply of them, and we mounted 4 under each wing of a torpedo bomber for the first time. And that was quite a unique experience, and we progressed from Guadalcanal up through Munda in New Georgia, and then Bougainville, and then Green Island. All of this aimed at taking care of the main Japanese base in the whole Pacific known as Rabaul. And as time went by, starting in 1970, because of what I was doing with American Airlines, I was able to take all 6 of our youngsters back out there. So we have a heck of a reputation being the only family that showed up in so-called primitive areas of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands with 6 young kids. Susie was 11, Kathy was 17. Holy mackerel. The incredible pictures that we managed to get with that crowd out there.
That had to be great for them to see, and memories for you. Now, when you say you're flying a torpedo boat, are these the ones that took off in the aircraft carriers?
No, oh yeah. TBM, TBFs were one of the most productive airplanes for the Navy in World War II, along with the dive bomber SBDs, and there can be a lot of talk about who managed to do what in World War II, but the TBMs were so versatile. We got the impression that you could put anything that would fit in the available space, it would fly it. And that almost got me in a problem on the last so-called mission I flew, which actually was a beer run.
A beer run, okay. And tell me about that.
I had been on a strike on one day that General Bryce asked me to try to hit a bridge, and the bombs hung up. So when I brought them back, when I landed and routinely opened the bomb bay door, the darn 500 pounders fell on the ground, and fortunate for me, they were still armed. And inspecting the bomb bay doors, there wasn't even a dent in them. So some days later, my buddy Patton and I had gotten orders to come home to recuperate from some other stuff, but we had a rudimentary officers club. We went to get a beer. There was no beer. So we went down to the flight line, talked to all the guys, and overnight they stripped out all of the guns, ammunition, just lightened up those 2 personal TBMs that were assigned to Pat and I for the special assignments we were doing for the generals. At dawn, we took off and flew about 700 miles over to Townsville, Australia, loaded them up full of good Australian beer and some cases of Australian rum and a few boxes of cigars. Well, when we went to take off, we were in such a rush we hadn't even weighed anything. And fortunately for us, the Townsville runway ended on a cliff top aimed out over the water. We never flew off the runway. We went off the end and sank down on top of the waves, and for the first hour and a half we flew in ground effect. We were so heavy. When we got to Bougainville and people discovered what was in there, boy, that was quite a celebration. Next day, we had some common sense and did some math. And for a torpedo bomber that was designed to carry a 2,000-pound torpedo or 2,000 pounds of bombs, we had carried 6,000 pounds in each one of those,
beer and booze.
Which was a pretty good haul.
I'm sure there's some commendation you got for that, right? No, I don't think so.
Everybody was pretty happy.
Pretty happy. Well, one of the things I find interesting with these with you pilots, we've had the opportunity to talk to some pilots in other shows. Your takeoffs on these ships, these aircraft carriers, were pretty challenging in those days.
Well, they could be, depending on weather conditions and what you were carrying and all that stuff. We got into a crazy thing when they needed a whole bunch of carriers that were really planned for the invasion of Japan. They were known as jeep carriers. They were built, most of them, on the smaller size ships, Liberty ships. They were about 500 feet long. The Navy, everything was happening so rapidly in those days that sometimes the level of experience in command positions, for example, like the commander of a ship, there hadn't been specific limits about sea states to operate, and airplanes were being lost overboard on takeoff or landing situations. And toward the end of the war, Pat Patton and I were assigned to document sea conditions that could be limiting factors for operations off of the smaller carriers.
Did you ever put any in the water?
Oh yeah, I wound up with the first two. First one, unfortunately, was a mid-air collision that threw me out. The second one, I got shot down, and that airplane is still laying on a reef at Bougainville. And people routinely fly over and see it down there. And we got to see it again back in 1970. And it was quite a progression.
I'll bet it was. We're going to continue, and we're going to make the transition from the war years are over, World War II, and next we end up back in Iowa, going back between Iowa and California. Well, now the war is over, and you've got some recovery time. You got some, jungle rot and all kinds of stuff over there, right? And they need to have some recuperation for Clency Hess, but you do go home. And so you're going back and forth between where, and you're in Iowa, and then you're going out to California?
Oh, yeah. I had met some pretty good medical people out in the Pacific, and they were doing research in what became cortisone. And I was like so many of the guys with the crazy, we called it jungle rot, a skin condition that some people would think of it characteristic of poison ivy, with stuff oozing out all over, very uncomfortable. And it was so good for me because I wound up as a kind of a guinea pig for him, and it solved my problem. But to this day, I still don't, if I put a Band-Aid on, it comes on off in less than 30 minutes, or I get a skin eruption.
Wow. Yeah. Let's see. You're back in Iowa and California. You're going back and forth. What is this? 1950, 51 in that territory?
No, that was starting out in early in the tail end of 46, early 47.
Okay. So, how do you make the transition from your recovery? Now you make a transition. You go become an airline pilot.
Oh yeah, that.
And who are you flying for?
I had some pretty unique friends before I really went to work with American Airlines, but all I did was get some people together, Art Collins, Mr. Collins Radio Company, and Johnny Atanasoff, who is the grandfather of computers. That's all documented thoroughly. We can talk about that sometime if you want to, but there are books published about Johnny. And I knew, working with these guys, I had connections with top executives of American Airlines before I ever became an American employee. And that was getting those two people together with an executive named Rodney King, which became what was known as SABRE, American Airlines' first electronic reservation system. To this day, as far as I know, still the biggest operating computer outfit in the world. It's association with people like that. And the German scientists that Art Collins got out of Germany. Everybody knows about Werner von Braun, Mr. Spaceman. But Alex Lippisch was the chief aeronautical engineer designer for Willy Messerschmitt. He was the designer of the first usable jet airplane that showed up as a twin-engine fighter at the Battle of the Bulge, and also the first rocket-powered M163 Comet.
Those were all Germans.
Those were Germans.
Yeah.
And that's why the research work I do to this day started with what I learned from those people.
Yeah. Remarkable, the genius of some of those German scientists as they traveled on to the space programs as as you mentioned. More than just Werner von Braun. Of course, we had our we had our own John Hobalt here. In the Joliet area.
Oh yes.
You're flying then for American Airlines. What's your route? What have you been flying from where to where? Or different flights?
I was only there just flying regular runs, but couldn't keep my mouth shut, so I got invited into kind of a unique organization that's never been published. They simply called it a corporate project group. It was made up primarily, they would assign vice presidential level executives to Rodney King to brainstorm the future. And I was the only pilot that was included in that operation, which is corporate stuff that has really never been published much. But that got me involved with the development of the first really usable jet airplane for our airlines, the Boeing 707, and continued all the way up through the DC-10.
And you're flying at some point, though, you're flying for a year or so. You're actually flying from L.A. to Hawaii or something?
I flew all the routes. Yeah. One of the things we did was get approval of the route from the West Coast to Sydney, Australia. And that's what was to my benefit, finally, of being able to take all our 6 kids with me down to us through all of the South Pacific, Hawaii first, of course, and Fiji, then Sydney, and then back up in the Solomon Islands and doing all the stuff for what we had started as Wings of Hope, the first of the organized charity for the aviation industry.
Yeah. Wings of Hope, tell me about that.
Wings of Hope is based in St. Louis, and you can look it up on the internet anytime. The whole organization is back there, but for decades, from a practical standpoint, I operated all the flight activities from Lewis Airport here, and that was pretty primary in keeping this place going, because I had these unique connections with Lewis going back to the earliest days after World War II, when after the military had used the facility during World War II, then it became what is now Lewis University, and redeveloped the aviation programs that are there now, first for aviation mechanics and then the flight program.
You mentioned that the military used that airport for a while. What were they doing there?
All primary early flight training.
Okay.
CP2, civil pilot training, was the entity, the government entity, but they would get people who wanted to be part of aviation, and it was a kind of a weeding out process, you might say, of getting them to the level of what was known as private pilot status, and to be able to continue the supply of needed pilots.
Good. Was that the civil air
Civil
patrol?
Pilot Training Program,
okay.
they called it.
Good. The you are now up to 1952,
Yeah.
and you're back in uniform.
Oh, things were going pretty tough in Korea, and among them was delivery of the mail. And when I first was flying with American, again, I couldn't keep my mouth shut, and I got involved with air freight and the contractual ways and all of that of flying the mail and modernizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taken back into the Marine Corps to help reorganize the mail delivery from Tokyo over into Korea. So I was part of a major effort with a so-called boxcar squadron, setting up all the schedules to Korea for mail delivery.
The career that you had, was it always with American Airlines after the war, after Korea? Was it always flying for American?
Well, I'm the sole survivor. You won't find this anywhere because Art Collins, who I referred to earlier, was awarded one of the first prime contracts to start Argonne National Laboratory. And the chief purpose of starting Argonne really was to capitalize on the development of the atom bomb. Everybody thinking, well, what the heck, this is going to be an energy source that will revolutionize the available way of generating electricity. So I had a landing strip in our backyard on the farm in Iowa, and Dr. Jack Livengood from Collins Radio Company and my brother-in-law, who was a very top guy with Art Collins, we would frequently commute from Cedar Rapids. They'd come out and have breakfast in the morning with me. I'd have the airplane ready, of course, and we would fly 180 miles in a Howard airplane that I had from war surplus. And we'd fly over here in 45 minutes, land in the pasture that was the beginning of Argonne National Laboratory. And our work was to finish the designing of the first cyclotron that was the basis of the nuclear energy industry. But that's all on account of Art Collins.
You're a fascinating man, Clancy. You're fascinating. So let's get back to your piloting American Airlines. How many years?
32.
32 years?
Yeah.
So does that count that 1 year, 51 to 52?
Oh, yeah.
Does it? Okay.
That includes that.
Okay. So tell me.
That was a temporary assignment back in the Marine Corps.
Was it? You were only there for like a year or two then?
2.
2 years. Okay. Now, you've organized the mail. You're out of the Marine Corps. You're with American Airlines. Was it different airlines in those days?
Oh, boy. It was a remarkable experience to be a customer on an airline in those days. It's a different world now, and I'm not too happy really with some aspects of it, but it's people who were customers treated it in such a manner they would show up in their Sunday best to go on an airline flight somewhere, and the services, the competition for having the best food on board airplanes and stuff like that was just remarkable to think
and
of.
Service, like these stewardesses at the doorway we're looking at.
Oh, man.
And then these two stewardesses we see, they're sitting back in, what is that, the lounge?
That was the lounge in the back of a DC-6.
Boy, that looked kind of cool. So you'd go back there.
You weren't told to get on the airplane, sit down, put your seatbelt on, shut up, and we'll get you there.
We'll get you there.
Oh,
it's
man.
kind of like today's more like a Greyhound bus than the.
It's a tight squeeze, and we shouldn't. We could get into quite an argument about this because economics comes into it.
Oh, sure.
And for most people, you get on board and you have a 17-inch wide seat that you sit in, and sometimes 3 people across, some airplanes with 5 across. It's a different world.
Yeah, well, they got to make some money, and that's how they do it. That's how they do it. All right, so organizations that you've been involved in. First of all, I know that you are a member of the Illinois Aviation Hall of Fame that began recently, back in 2008.
2008, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That came about because of that organization that does that every year. In the Hall of Fame, there are various aspects of that in different communities, and this is the one for aviation.
Yeah. Now you have been. I left that out of the intro. You've been a speaker at many of these pilot associations,
oh, yes,
conferences and conventions throughout the United States. I have it down here someplace where
I did it for a lot of Rotaries.
And Rotary Club too, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Are you a Rotarian?
I was for a long time,
Okay.
but I can't, I just can't handle it.
Get to the meetings, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Rotary this year, and this is taking place in 2012, but also into 2013, Rotary is celebrating and commemorating their 100th year as a club. So it's you're almost catching up to them, Clancy. Almost catching up.
In my travels, I was able to go to makeup meetings in places like all the way to Sydney, Australia, and come back with a flag for the Lockport Rotary.
There you go.
And they had a whole collection of them until something happened. They, as far as I know, they were destroyed in the fire.
In the fire. Well, Lockport's famous for those fires. You gotta watch Lockport's got a lot of fires for some reason. The EEA is something special and close to your heart as well.
EAA started just run-of-the-mill guys like myself who, for our own personal reasons, wanted to build our own airplanes. And it has grown so exponentially. It is the biggest convention of any kind anywhere in the world. We've had years, our convention is always the last week of July, and we've had years when we had more than 1 million attendants.
Yeah.
Last year, with the economy what it is at now, we slipped down to about 850,000.
In Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Oshkosh, Wisconsin. If you want to see it, pull it up on the internet. AirVenture.
Yeah, it is. I know as a kid, I was going up to Wisconsin, and way back, and it wasn't as expansive and huge and phenomenal as it is today.
Oh, it's something else now. But I'm prejudiced, of course. First airplane I bought in 1940 for $400 is restored and in our museum up there. If you ever go up that way, you'd have to spend days. That museum we have up there rivals the Smithsonian.
Really? Yes. I've not been there, and I'm going to make that.
And then I kept a P-38 after World War II.
Now, is that P-38 the same type that Tom Buck has at the Joliet
Airport?
Yes. Okay.
Tommy Buck has it as a TB. No, that's a TBM that he has, a torpedo bomber. But what I have up at Oshkosh is the P-38 twin-engine fighter.
And you flew that?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of research on air turbulence in the based out of Bishop in California. The standing wave there. Two of us did a bunch of stuff with the P-38s, and we actually were soaring with both engines shut down. We were able to soar in some instances up to 35,000 feet with both engines shut down. And that airplane is now on display at Oshkosh.
In Oshkosh. So when you go up there, I went on the website, and if you go to if you go to Google and click on Clency Hess, you'll see a story of Clancy at Oshkosh. And actually, your motorhome's parked right outside here in the parking lot at the Fitzpatrick house. He drives a motorhome up there and puts a little awning and canopy, and people come by and by the droves and talk to Clancy Hess.
That's for our UFO organization.
Yeah.
We are not the flying objects. We are the United Flying Octogenarians. There's more than 1,200 of us. And you qualify if you're still flying when you meet the age 80.
And you're still flying?
Oh, yes.
That's great. Clancy, you're something else. You also are a member of, am I going to get this right, the AOPA?
Yeah, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association.
Now, you're a founder of that, aren't you? One of the founders of that?
Yeah. Starting from a week from the last founding meeting they had in Philadelphia. And the first guy, his name was Hartranft, Doc Hartranft, showed up in Chicago. Just by chance, I was having lunch at the lunch counter at what is now Midway Airport. They had a famous chili there. And this guy came along and sat down next to me and asked me, well, is that pretty good stuff? And of course I clued him in. And then in conversation, he told me who he was and about AOPA. That was 1 week after the formation of AOPA. And I helped him publish the first brochure we mailed out to get publicity, to get members. Presently, that has grown to a membership of right about 450,000.
Wow, that's impressive. All over the world, I would imagine.
Yes.
All over the world. Clancy Hess, what's on the docket now? What are you working on now? What's your project?
Oh boy.
Not all of them now. Just pick out one or two.
I have to be careful, but we continue with our stuff about energy, which turned into quite a can of worms. But there's a potential that you'll hear about it sometime pretty soon. But a little clue about it, it is specifically unique and had almost been accomplished by the Germans in World War II. And I got the information relative to the primary energy resource that has been totally ignored, because when it is available for worldwide use, it has the potential of making totally obsolete all use of petroleum, nuclear, coal, wind turbines. That's all obsolete.
I'm going to get my money out here right now. Invest in that so I can be one of the first ones.
But I can't talk about it too much. It's pretty close to the vest. I can tell you that we've had a pretty unique life experience that started in 1979 when the National Chamber of Commerce heard about us and published us without talking to us first. And the roof fell in. And everything's been done to put me away ever since.
Yeah. I remember that was our first conversation, as a matter of fact. It all comes back now because I had you on the air in 1980, and I remember all of that controversy at the time. So
oh, that's documented stuff.
Stay tuned to Clency Hess. You never know what comes next. Clency, thank you so much for taking time out here at the beautiful Fitzpatrick House. Right across the street from Lewis University, which I know is close to your heart, and you still work as a volunteer and along with Brother Gaffney and a couple of projects here at Lewis as well. And we thank you. We thank your family for allowing you to come out and visit us and spend some time. It's great to have you. Very nice. Great.